Good evening once again, ladies and gentlemen, and if you are familiar with videos I've been putting out for the last couple of days, you might be aware of the fact that there's been talks about, well, whether they want to, in theory, leave the European Convention on Human Rights just to send planes over to Rwanda. Now, once again, ignoring the fact that what planes are willing to actually take them on board, Ryanair would certainly never want to do that because their reputation is, well, it can only go lower. They're not going to look like champions if they do this. Not even the RAF will do it. But one thing I wanted to continue to do is talk about everything that is covered within the Convention of Human Rights, because remember, ladies and gentlemen, if we leave this, we'll be losing or saying goodbye to a lot of these. And bear in mind, you could argue the case about British law would cover a number of these, but again, before we make an incredibly rash and stupid decision, it's important to be reminded about exactly what this is for. So you can find a lot more of these in other videos I've done in this series, but here is a pretty big one: the right to life. The state must protect our lives and investigate properly if someone dies in unexpected or suspicious circumstances. The right to life is our most basic right. We all have the right to life and to not be unlawfully killed by another person. Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights, enshrined in UK law by the Human Rights Act, protects this right. The state is not allowed to violate this right, even in times of emergency. And expectations are only allowed when absolutely necessary. Article 2 puts specific obligations on the state, both negative, preventing public authorities taking lives, and positive, requiring them to take certain steps to protect our lives. Protections. Article 2 requires our government to take positive steps to protect the lives of everyone in the UK. It must do this by having and enforcing effective criminal legislation, in other words, making murder and manslaughter criminal offences with appropriate sentencing powers for judges, requiring the police to take reasonable steps to protect a person's life if they know or ought to know that they are facing real and immediate risk. However, this should not put an impossible or disproportionate burden on the authorities. Taking appropriate steps to prevent accidental deaths by having a legal and administrative framework in place that effectively protects lives. Prohibitions. The state must not take life. Under limited and specific circumstances, Article 2 won't have been violated if a death is caused by a use of force that's no more than absolutely necessary. In self-defense, or to defend another person from unlawful violence, to lawfully arrest someone or to prevent the escape of somebody who has been lawfully detained, to take action lawfully to quell a riot, the state must also make sure police and security services facing situations where lethal force is possible are appropriately trained, instructed, and given clear guidance on when they can use such force. Investigations and inquests. The right to life also means there must be proper, effective investigations into all deaths caused by the state or where it appears the state has failed to protect life. Article 2 requires such an investigation to be independent, be effective, be prompt, be open to public scrutiny, and involve the next of kin. The usual way this happens is by an inquest or a public inquiry. The purpose is to bring to light any wrongdoing, neglect, or systematic failings to make sure those responsible are held accountable and that failings are not repeated and lessons are learned. Article 2 in action. Stories of families fight for justice. Justice for the 96. On the 15th of April 1989, 96 Liverpool FC supporters were killed at the Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield. For years, police blamed fans for causing the crush, feeding false stories to the press suggesting that hooliganism and drinking by Liverpool fans were the cause of the disaster. The blaming of fans continued even after a 1990 inquiry chaired by Lord Justice Taylor found the main reason for the disaster was the failure of police control. Despite this, the first coroner's inquest into the Hillsborough disaster, completed in 1991, ruled that all deaths were accidental. For decades, families and survivors fought to overturn these verdicts. Article 2 was essential to that campaign. Finally, following the publication of the Hillsborough Independent Panel's report in 2012, the original verdicts were quashed and new inquests were heard, this time complying with Article 2. In April 2016, the new inquest found that the 96 victims had been unlawfully killed and Liverpool supporters were in no way to blame. Without the Human Rights Act and Article 2, the new inquest may have never have happened, and the families and survivors of the Hillsborough would have never got the justice they deserved. Deep-cut deaths. Between 1995 and 2002, 4 young soldiers, Privates Sean Benton, Cheryl James, James Collinson, and Jeff Gray, died of gunshot wounds while training at Deep-Cut Army barracks. Their families fought for years for the answers they and their children deserved, only to be met with stonewalling, silence, and suspicion. Finally, supported by Liberty, they used the Human Rights Act to access evidence and demand the thorough investigations they had been denied for so long, and to make sure the army learned lessons so young soldiers would be protected in the future. So, there's going to be more things that we'll be discussing next time, ladies and gentlemen, but the important details for this video are thus. Is that, think about if you were, let's say, if you had family or who was in some way a victim or related to the Hillsborough disaster, and what do you suppose would have happened without things like Article 2? Think about that, ladies and gentlemen, and I reckon there's probably a lot of people to this day will be looking at this and wondering, how did things go so wrong? I mean, it stands to question, and bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, is that, do you really think that if we didn't have this right now, do you reckon that any of those people would have received justice? Well, these are the sorts of things worth thinking about, ladies and gentlemen, especially when you think something like that is ever going to happen again. I mean, what about the victims of the Grenfell disaster? Was it not the rights of all those who died in that fire to be guaranteed that the authorities would, or those responsible for building these towers, would make sure that, forget aluminium cladding for 1 second, that the place was not going to burst into flames? Monty Python even did a satire of this skit back in 1971, and, well, think about it that way, ladies and gentlemen. What do you expect is going to happen now? So, with all that being said and done, I will look forward to reading more articles based on the Convention of Human Rights next time. So, take care, and bye-bye for now.